if we have an audience of all of them. We are live.
Okay, so this is the planning board meeting for November 1st. I will start with a roll call. Alden Clark. Here. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Beth Delisle is not here. Bob Coe.
Here.
Jamie Pennington.
Here.
Heather Rogers is not going to be here. Rick Tainter here. Charlie Palmisano. Present. Jen Bluestein. No, and Brian Belkin is not going to be here. Okay. So we have no public hearings tonight. So the first item under general business is a request for final release of security for the reserve at Bashaw Farm. And there was a request to continue to our next meeting on November 15th. Do I have a motion to continue?
So moved. Alden.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. And we do not need a roll call since we're all here. So all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So unanimous in favor. Okay, the second item is a request for minor modification at Donahue Court on 2015 SP02 and 2015 DEF01. Who's here to speak on this matter? Anywhere.
It's the microphone.
That's a camera and like.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Brown. I'm a local architect with an address at 48 Market Street. With me tonight is John Gorman of Gorman Homes. John is the property owner, builder, and developer for this lot at 26 Toppin. So this lot has had a long history of nothing happening, and owners have changed a couple times. The architect has changed a couple times, and this is the third and hopefully final request for a modification to this special permit. I was before this board. I think it was probably, in 2018. I think there was maybe only one member. Yeah, one or two members on the planning board that have been on it that long. So we requested a minor modification of special permit in 2018, and subsequent to that in 2019, there was another modification request, which wasn't totally dissimilar to what we were trying to do in 2018. So I'll just walk you through this stuff very quickly. So this is, our proposed site plan, and what you're seeing here in red is the outline of the 2018 request. So what we're proposing now is nearly 1,000 square feet smaller than that 2018 request. In 2018, we also had a detached garage in the lower left-hand corner. We're no longer proposing to do that. And also in 2018, as part of the project, there was an in-law apartment of nearly 1,000 square feet. This plan sort of retains the best of what we had in 2018. Some of the same concepts. It's sort of like a dumbbell shaped footprint. It's a house that has a frontage on both Donahue Court and Toppins, meaning the side of the house that faces Toppins looks like a front, as well as the side that faces Donahue. We had a circular driveway off of Donahue Court in 2018. This plan has that same thing. And the garage, the access to the property, to the garage and the property in the back through the hammerhead. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly walk you through. And what we have here, these are the 2018 drawings on the top. And on the bottom, this is what we're currently proposing. So the one thing that immediately jumps out to you is that this request before you tonight is not nearly as long as it was in 2018, or as big. We've changed the style of the house a little bit, still very, very traditional. Changed the roof line. It's no longer a gambrel, but a more conventional gable. And what you're seeing here is what I'm calling sort of the true front of the house. And this is the front that is facing Donahue Court, with the garage, three-car garage off to the right there. Next slide, please. So this is these are both elevations that face Toppins Lane, both of them, and I think this is a condition in the 2015 special permit, where the front of the house facing Toppins Lane had to have some sort of entryway. And so both of these plans had that. And again, on the bottom, this is what you're going to see through, from Toppins Lane. Just looks like sort of, very, very traditional, front. And off to the left there, we can't really see it, but, this proposal before you tonight is, it's a little bit taller, but it's only, about a little less than a foot taller than what we had in 2018. Next slide, please. This is what I'm calling the back of the property, but this is, as you're facing the house from Toppins, it's actually the left side. Again, not nearly as long, as what we had in 2018. Garage off to the left there. And, next slide. And just coming full circle, this is the garage side, facing, uphill towards the hospital. And then again, in 2018, what you're seeing there was sort of the entrance to the in-law apartment, which we no longer have. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Yes.
So, are there any change in materials in the outside of the building?
No, we're still planning to do more or less the same things, kind of rot resistant trim everywhere, cedar sidewall shingles.
Right.
That will either be painted or pre-finished.
Question. I was reading the agenda earlier, and there's a suggestion to maybe have the neighbors chime in. Is that something that?
I talked to both, yeah, so I talked to both of the abutters. 28, which is if you're facing 26 on the left,
Yeah.
and the owner of 48 Donahue Court. Both of them had no concerns. I emailed them the plans and what the original one was, and then what the updated proposed one was. Neither of them had any concerns on it. So to the right is Anna Jake's.
Right.
I didn't knock on their door, but
Right.
I don't think that they would have too much concern.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
The folks in the rear.
The folks on this side over here, 28, and then the folks on
The
the
Duchennes.
rear.
Yeah, exactly. Two folks that are most immediately impacted by this.
Is Donahue Court a private street? Or a public street?
It's private.
Private.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a special permit court, I believe.
Correct. Yeah.
Does
Private.
it doesn't provide any legal frontage to the hospital, does it?
I know. No.
Okay, any other questions?
One quick question, is there any change relative to the site grading? Anything substantive there?
No, I believe it's the same
What
exact.
has changed, has the
And-
site changed at all?
So that site, Scott has found out, if you look left to right on here, it kind of runs kind of quickly down. So it's higher in the back than it is in the front by about probably 2 to 3 feet. So you're really constrained by those grades, particularly because you have the driveway coming off the rear of the court. So you have to deal with the entrance into the garage. And then hopefully you can make the front corner work as well. So, I mean, that you're really constrained by that 2 to 3 foot drop and where the entrance of the garage is. So there hasn't been any changes really from what the original one was.
I recall this property. I had to look into it myself years ago, and we had some significant drainage requirements that I think almost over-engineered.
Yeah, on the approved subdivision,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in 2018, we had hired Steve Sawyer to do a drainage plan, and I think in 2019, that was modified. And we didn't hire him to do another plan this time around, but we still plan to incorporate some of those key aspects of his design.
Anything else? If not, we have two options before us. We can consider the request minor and vote to approve it tonight, or we can consider it a major request and require there to be a formal amendment followed by a public hearing. I would take a motion on either.
I make a motion as a minor modification.
Do you want to combine that with to approve?
Yes. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, so you got it.
Great, thank you very much.
The next item on our agenda is a request for final release of security at 21 to 27 Hancock Street slash athletic court. And he was appearing before us today.
I'm just showing the as-built, I think, I don't know whether all members are familiar with the project generally, because some may not have been on the at the time, that's. There are 4 units built in these, 2 structures, right, you have a common shared driveway as a court sort of in between, and it's now complete, right?
Well done, yeah.
So can you make a presentation about this? Let us know what was required to be done and where you are with it.
Yeah, so we're approved to do 2 townhouses left and right, that's
Oh,
right.
excuse me, just for the record, did you state your name for the record?
Jake Caswell.
She has it.
So it's actually 2 pieces of property that was joined as one. So we came in left side, this it's a townhouse, So it's actually 2 townhouses, 4 units. So we came through, that was no paper road, lever court. So came back through lever court, put that in, there's 2 units to the right, so the right side is 27 Hancock Street, so that's like. Now it's 27 Hancock and 1 lever court, and the left side is 25 Hancock and 2 lever court. The left side actually was an old, like, it was a commercial building, it was block, basically a dump down there. I don't know if anyone remembers it, down there, it was pretty bad. So we came there, cleaned it up. The right side, 27 Hancock, there was an existing older house. When we got in this work, we found the foundation was bad, so I actually had to move it. Put a foundation under it and put it back on and save that unit. So now you come in now, it's all done, it's all landscaped out and yeah, that's it. I mean, I think it looks pretty nice actually, but
So I was confused about the dashed line between the 2 properties on the right. It looks like a property line, but it apparently is, I'm not sure what it's meant to show that. The line that cuts between the 2 units.
that's actually technically the bond, that's actually the property line between 27 Hancock Street and 1 Lever Court.
So there is I thought we only created 2 lots.
Well, yeah,
It's a condo, it's the.
they're still on one
So it's not a
lot.
property.
It's a exclusive use area.
Yeah, it's how we had to break them up for
Yeah.
legal reasons, we do condo.
And do we have do we have recorded copies of the drainage easement and the tree easements and so forth?
Yeah, it's funny, I was trying to recall when I came in here, whether we have those.
We did all that for the last meeting, when I gave the surety,
Yeah,
then we got
I know
all the sign offs.
the trees all set.
Yeah, trees were all set, I had to plant up all of that rail trail area. Jordy gave the okay on that, I basically was, the last meeting I had with you guys, I was like 99% done, I closed was coming. And then just,
What I was most.
The drainage though is.
I was concerned about the cross easement for drainage in the back, because that was a big issue.
Yep.
And I wasn't sure whether we actually had that taken care of. There's a cross easement here that I have. Here's a recorded easement. Okay, so, just check through this.
I think it was covering this back corner where there was.
Another core easement, there is a maintenance easement for trees. Oh, yeah, drainage easement is there, okay. So it does seem to have been.
because last time I was here, we're in between a meeting of. Remember there's something going on with like the trees, I want to give the trees to the city.
Yeah,
But the city technically couldn't take it until they said, we'll take the trees, so that's where that all got like, kind of a little bit of legalese tied up in there.
yeah, and I see, I have a recorded easement plan here, so. Good. Any other questions?
Great.
Charlie,
Before I forget, I actually have to recuse myself. I forgot that I was
okay,
involved in this.
since today,
I'm just gonna close it.
and Alden is also recused.
I recuse myself as well.
So there were 3 of us voting, is that an issue?
Yeah, sounds like it.
What, we only need a majority of those present for this, right?
Yeah, I think you're good with just the majority that you have, that's probably.
So we get 3 to nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, assuming we all in there.
Assuming they're, yeah.
But you want money back.
So, Jamie or Bob, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, In that case, I would accept a motion to grant the final release of security for Levitt Court in the amount of $100,000.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? And 2 abstentions.
Sorry, who seconded it, Bob?
Bob second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
All right, guys, thank you.
that was tough.
Have a good night. Hopefully get out early. We'll see you coming.
Yeah.
See you guys.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so, as usual, we have the CPC representative on the agenda.
Yeah, I don't know, we might be,
Yeah.
unless somebody wants to jump up now and volunteer.
You were interested at one point, right?
Yeah, but you had mentioned that other new member.
Yeah, she's not here, so.
Yeah, I know. I'm still willing to defer to her if she.
Why don't we,
Yeah, we can carry it, just a footnote to that, and more importantly, also so that we can get a designation from the planning board. The way that our charter and written ordinances are set up, it's a little bit cumbersome, but in effect, even though you've been appointed to this particular board, you have to go through the city, even though you've been pulled from this membership and saying, I've been in person, you have to go through the city council, so we have to cycle this through the city council's docket, have it go to committee, whether or not you have to attend one of the committee meetings and so forth, just to kind of revisit being appointed as a liaison to another city board, even though you've already been appointed to this one. It's a little cumbersome and excessive process, in my opinion, for the CPC, the way that this works, but here to be the liaison, after we get confirmation here, we then want to ship that right over to city council so they can get that, because the CPC applications are being taken in December earlier than we used to do our cycle. So we could take, the city council could take up the recommendation, the committee could take up recommendations early in the year and then get that to the city council before they do their usual budget cycle, which is in the spring. So in essence, if we want to have a planning board rep on this CPC round, we need to do it soon.
But now that the STRUs are out of the way for the city council, things might move to there a little easier.
We still need
the appeal process.
What's it? Yeah, still need a second vote on that ordinance, but yeah.
so, with that, Brian, do we need to get Alden on
Yeah.
before this?
Sorry.
Do we need to get Alden on?
I think it's still doable in the time frame. In my view. It's just that I wouldn't personally go past the next meeting.
Well, why are we resisting just?
Well, because Jen Bluestein had also indicated she might be interested,
Oh,
but she hasn't been here to target, she just said that to me outside the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, to not give her a choice.
It's not it's not typically a heavy lift. It's usually what it boils down to is basically 3 meetings in the spring that are really crucial, where you attend, you hear the presentations, usually 2 nights, depending on how many applications we have, you break it down into 2 nights. You attend, you hear the presentations from the applicants, you review the materials that have been submitted online and OpenGov, the same way as you do with the applications here. And then you effectively provide a recommendation to the city council as to what to fund. And, we provide the budgetary numbers and so forth, what you have to work with. But in essence, you're providing an advisory recommendation to the city council, which then, if they go along with that, approve the appropriation itself. Sometimes there's a debate or deviation from there, but usually the city council, walking through its own questions, does the same thing as the CPC is recommended, so.
So we'll carry that forward for another meeting.
Okay.
Correspondence regarding short-term rental units, this is kind of moot at this point.
Somewhat, yeah. Yeah. Well, we hope.
We hope.
We hope.
So, the city council did vote first reading on a modified, item, so.
Amended
amended, modified, revised, which is pretty tight, and it's strict as to parking and strict as to number of units you can own, and investor owners are sunsetted in 3
There's
years.
an amortization of a very short 3-year period, so there's not much of an investor sort of component that's
Basically one licensing.
cycle, yes, yeah.
Oh, well, is it 1 license in second, or is it?
It's 4 years.
Oh, sorry,
3 licenses in second.
sorry, yeah, actually, because the licensing is actually by year, so you're right, the special permit would have been, that's right. Here, there's only 1 special permit cycle, but there's 3 license.
What's the cycle for the special permit? How long?
3 years.
3
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just be one.
You, annual registration, right?
Yep.
All right, and so what do you mean by the second vote?
They need to vote twice on the ordinance.
It's kind of like to make sure that there weren't any second guesses or questions,
It could go the other way.
I was just gonna say,
You could.
we would be having we'd be having a 9th or 10th public hearing on the matter. So that's one reason why some folks might be just, it's good that we have something at this point we can maybe work with. So.
Okay, so that moves us on to discussion on planning and zoning projects. You want to give any updates on anything?
I didn't necessarily want to add so much to this meeting. I just brief mentioned, the Story Avenue stuff where, I think I've mentioned before, Minko has some interest in doing a project at the Hodge side of the Low Street. We're not exactly sure when that'll come in. I have to circle back with them, but, they have been talking about bringing a project in on that side, somewhere between, let's say somewhere between like a, 80, 100 units, maybe sort of on the maximum side. But something, sort of in that range on that side of the street. And then we've also had Richard Kaplan, who, and this is me representing him, who has the Port Plaza area and who's interested, as of just a day or two ago, are interested in doing a roughly 200 unit development or building where the Kmart is. So that has a relationship to the zoning discussion of the study we'll be doing now with the grant we got for additional outside consultant services to help with our office bandwidth, is just to develop new zoning for that area that will change it from just, all independent, commercial uses to actually a mixed use, to more like a village node. We have some consistency with the type of stuff or forms that you might see in the downtown, where you have activation of first floor, residential above. We might have some buildings that are just residential, but I think it's important to have a mix of uses in that area. So one of the things we'll want to do with the zoning, I think, is to make sure that it's not just multifamily as of right, for instance, like the 40R, but actually, some element to maintain, not that I think they'll necessarily from the market be driven away as commercial uses, but we just want to make sure that it is actually a mixed use district as opposed to the complex of housing units. So it's more for us to discuss there, but there's a relationship there about whether or not we use that new district to take credit for ourselves with the MBTA communities guidelines. It's a different, it's a different area of the city, but whether or not we want to use that. The attorney Mead has represented them saying that they can't make it work other than just doing 10% of the units as affordable. And this is a much longer discussion we're getting into with the whole MBTA thing, but there's a very big difference between the way our 40R district was set up under one statute, which allows us to go up to 25%. And we did that in large part because we knew that if you get 25% of the units in any particular project, like 1 Boston Way or 3 Boston Way, or even the one on Haley's, all 3 of those projects, I think those are rentals. So because of the way that these state's regulations work, and again, this is all in the weeds, but if 25% of those are affordable and it's a rental building, which all these 3 are, we are getting credit on our subsidized housing inventory, which is the 10% we try to reach to make sure we're in a sort of a safe harbor status. We've been getting credit for all the units in each of the 3 of those buildings, even though technically only 25% of them are quote, restricted in terms of the pricing. That's because they wanted to stimulate rental units. However, the new MBTA guidelines from the state are very different. They actually go in the other direction and basically say, we're going to put a ceiling on how high you can go. And they say you can't go higher than 10%. You can argue with the state to go up to 20%, but you can never get to 25%. So there are a bunch of different parameters, and Rick and I have talked about this. We're gonna have more discussion, in the coming weeks and months, and we'll be laying out, sort of a framework, a presentation to kind of go through what the requirements are, what we think some of our options are, looking at some maps and what the district boundaries might be, how we try to keep the advantage we have of our existing 40R district. But we have basically a couple of zoning pieces that are going on simultaneously in different areas of the city. One is dealing with the state's requirement around the train station, building out of our 40R district. The other one is the Story Avenue area, putting aside, for instance, Waterfront West, where, other changes we're making with, zoning to do cleanup of things and some adjustments in the business park and things like that. Story Avenue, kind of re-envisioning that area. So we'll be having much more discussion about that, both informally, but then rolling into a more formal process. And we'll have, some more renderings to look at, some discussions probably about overall city build out as part of that too, just recognizing we're targeting new growth. Well, how much growth are we, expecting in the future, all that. But in essence, we're looking to bring forward to the city council a zoning change for the Story Avenue area sometime in the spring, let's say late spring of next year. If you have any questions about those things, let us know. But we'll be coming back with more presentation materials to walk through, what the requirements are, what we're thinking, our best option or options are based on meeting the state's requirements, but also being appropriate for Newburyport's neighborhoods and, character. So,
I was gonna say, I recall there's some sort of deadline that we had.
I was gonna say that, we've got 2 deadlines.
Okay.
So the Story Avenue project, we've got a deadline of June 30th.
correct, that we have to submit that to the city council. We have to provide the deliverable essentially to the city council that we prepared and provide that to the state for the grant reimbursement. doesn't necessarily assume that the council has adopted it, by then, but we do, like Rick said, have to deliver that by that June timeframe, because that's the deliverable in the grant, and that's the product we're producing essentially, consistent with their aim at the state level.
Right, then even more restrictive is our MBTA deadline, which is December 31st. And
This year?
oh, no.
Fortunately, next year, yeah.
We haven't showed you that plan yet. So I was, I mean, it seems like a long way away, but I was getting nervous. I was talking to Eddie about it, because to get to December 31st, we have to the city, I'm going backwards from December 31st. The city council has to vote the zoning, which is likely going to be hard to explain to the public and possibly controversial. Before that, we have to get a sign off from the state, right? Is that before the city council vote?
What we want, it's not necessarily that we need to get their approval, it's more that we want to get their pre-application to make sure that there are no questions before our council adopts it, that it is in compliance, which is the 90-day, they are giving themselves, if we submit it, 90 days to do it, so we need to make sure we leave that.
Right, so let's assume there's a 3 months of city council review and 3 months of state review. That takes us down to midsummer.
Right.
So our deadline for the MBTA zoning is almost the same as it is for Story Avenue. And so with that in mind, I didn't talk to you about this before, but I'm thinking, we're coming into a busy season where it's hard to have additional meetings. But I think we should plan for an additional meeting in January. It would be basically a workshop meeting to really dig into this stuff.
I can tell you my vacation right now.
Yeah, you have a vacation.
You're booking a vacation right now.
Flight, so,
Oh.
we go to Utah every year,
Yeah.
third week of January. Yeah.
Did we want to map out any specific date, just so we can think about, I know it's a little bit in advance, but just thinking about dates that work, now?
Why don't we put that in our staff memo for the next meeting?
For the 15th,
And we'll
okay,
discuss that.
okay,
Because it doesn't look like we're gonna have a lot of stuff on the agenda yet.
no, I think it's fine, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
I think you had mentioned that it might be a good idea to get some images or ideas of what we'd like to see,
Yeah.
even though it may not
Yeah.
jive with what they're
Yeah.
thinking from a practical point of view or a
Yes.
financial point of view.
Yes,
But it'd be kind of neat if we,
Yeah, I think if we actually had and I could volunteer to do this, is to put together kind of a shared folder that we could look at stuff on.
that would be great, yeah, and to be able
Also,
to-
they sent me some photos today, so.
yeah, that'd be great to be able to kind of like Shrek, kind of run through people's thoughts, visions of, based on, there's a million different examples out there, but this is the type of architecture, streetscape, et cetera, I mean.
Scale.
Scale, height, setbacks, I mean, we tried to have some basic design parameters in the 4-yard district, some of those we want to carry here, some of them we want to tweak or change. So we need to think about things like that, both site standards as well as building or architectural standards. I think that the scale and form are just as important over there as they are in other areas of the city. And we need to make sure it's not just, a 5-story allowance straight up, it's, you got some sort of step back or articulation, things like that, so. Similar.
Are we thinking like, is there a maritime theme or is there something that, do we have any say in this?
No, we certainly have design say, certainly. The issue with the MBTA is that we have to allow multifamily as of right at a gross density of 15 units per acre.
Right, which keep in mind, our 40-yard district really already does that as of right.
Yeah.
With a similar, design review
Yeah.
process, still as of right use, but design review. And depending on the developer you have, how much back and forth the debate you have about how reasonable we are with, of course, the design standards, but we're starting with the point of, you need to meet these design standards and then ask for waivers if you don't, you can't meet those and walk through that. And we've had, there are a couple of waivers granted on the Mako projects.
Yeah.
But they were, I would say, reasonably responsive to our concerns and walking through those. I would want to see, regardless of who's proposing things in the Story Avenue or other sites in the 4-yard district or MBTA, I would want to see similar, development relationships where they're not just coming in saying, here's the building we want to put in there, we're not gonna, we want them to be responsive to our design standards, despite the fact, like Rick says, that the state wants us to make it, as of right, like our 40-yard district is. And we've been successful in the 40-yard district, I think, thus far with that. But also, I also think we've had, relatively speaking, a decent partner for the development of the 3 sites. They've been responsive, like especially with the Haley site, we spent a lot of time on that plaza, the commercial space, and they were adapting their plan to that. Hopefully the other parties we're working with do the same.
Is Mingo thinking that they're gonna go exactly where our use is and then use the back area? Is that what they're
They're
proposing?
in essence thinking about that front section there being used for the building, and then a bunch of backland, the old Woodman piece that was run as part of the 40B years ago. That piece be essentially preserved as open space and possibly conveyed to the city, but in either way, preserved essentially. So very similar, I'd say, to a bunch of other things that have happened in that area, which is good, which means the buildings are up by the street. Backland is preserved, it goes along with like the older woods and the tropic star land behind CVS and, that larger complex of open space behind it. So we're clustering our development, and not having it sprawl out. And so I think, relatively speaking, it's a good thing. In concept, it's good where it's tracking.
Is he thinking retail at all and along with the apartments?
He hasn't assumed that in there, and he also expressed some concern in the Port Yard District about making that viable space. We were pressing them to, have a little bit higher ceiling floor, in the first floor, put some living work units in there, try to make it so that it could adapt itself over time to more active uses, even though they were saying we can't make that work. I would want to see us press for more similar here, only in that I wouldn't want to see, every developer coming in saying, look, the easiest thing for us is to do is residential. We just want to plop down a box, put the residential units in it, and then we don't have the active, vibrancy that is a village, node or center. We have basically the flip side of the commercial side of it. Now we're flipping completely the other end of the direction where it's just a bedroom sort of, set of buildings, tenement buildings or something, so we want to have it be, I think, a combination of those things, and whether or not we mandate that every building have that, I think is less important than the fact that then somehow overall we don't let every single site and every single building become just residential.
Well, I'm immediately thinking that we're gonna have so many residential units there, they're gonna need some sort of retail service as well. And you're taking Kmart, which I think is a great idea, personally, I think it's a great idea to do something with that building, and if they're gonna put, I guess a mid-rise residential, that's a lot of people in that area. I would think that they need services.
Right.
Sure, you got market access, Stop and Shop and whatever else,
Right.
but, there's limited amount of retail. in
Right.
there.
I would hope that the market kind of forces it to be sort of self-sustaining and
Yeah.
needed, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, sometimes we like to think, all right, we still might want to have a stopgap at the end of the day to make sure that it doesn't get out of control, right? Because at least I've seen, like, there are certain instances where it's just easier for developers to, it's easier path to the money to do the residential than it is to do the combination of things, right? And it adds more complexity and, so we might see people who say, like, we just want to be residential, but we might need to press that envelope if we see it going awry where it becomes a, too
Well, I
much.
think that's also potentially mitigates traffic, right? So
Right.
versus driving, unless you do,
Stack parking, it's walkable neighborhood, you don't have to drive somewhere.
Yeah, and it is, it'll be a feeder to downtown, I think that will hurt it. But
Yeah.
I think that might be one way to press it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The other
Just a
thing, I
thought
think,
for the future.
the other thing for Newburyport, I think, given, the importance we have with things like the National Register District and, the dynamics with permitting in that area is, I think it also allows us to try to direct more of the growth or, things that are happening to those areas, in the future, rather than having so many continual debates about infill. It leaves, I don't want to say alleviates pressure, but allows some options for those locations to focus on those things. And just say, look, there are options for more units and development and so forth, but we can put those there. We don't necessarily have to keep piling everything into, and I'm using the National Register District as just sort of a rough boundary, but, that's a, a densely developed area already. There's a fair amount of, sensitivity to the character and so forth. So, not to say that there shouldn't be ever any infill in that area, right? We still see, sort of organic things happening, but it allows us to focus new growth in a more comprehensive way for those areas while also changing them and have them be more representative of Newburyport,
Well, that last comment, I won't keep you guys, but, this is the planning board, right?
Yeah.
So future thoughts, there's been so much discussion about the lack of hotels and, the STRUs or whatever you're, calling this acronym for that particular type of, investment property. I'm thinking at the same time, do we throw in there that there's the possibility to put a hotel in as part of the zoning amendment, right? And then that way, we don't have to revisit it, and we're also potentially encouraging it. So maybe it's in other cities, I'm sure you guys are all familiar, they call them, I think condo hotels, right? So they can actually have a combination of residential and hotels. So maybe you kill two birds with one stone by thinking about this as part of the zoning,
Yeah, it actually came up in a discussion we had when Lisa Mead, who's representing Kaplan, as the Port Plaza area, came in. She was suggesting essentially that we sort of, maybe start with the template of the 4-yard district. Now, I had already been looking at that because to me, it's something we've already had experience with. We have some design review with that. We know sort of what that might be producing in some ways, and we can then update standards and so forth. But it's essentially the permit process for MBTA communities, for instance, that the state wants anyway. It's as of right, residential, takes the question of use out of the equation and says, how do you want it the form to look? In the 40-yard district, the initial thoughts that they come back with is, we didn't include the hotel in there, but in our 40-yard district, we allow a hotel to happen in that district, and I also agree that we should allow that here in this district. I think there's a difference between a hotel in Story Avenue, very different than one in the downtown. I don't know that the one in Story Avenue is quite as beneficial as saying one down mainly because you don't want to have people visit there and just drive all their cars to the downtown, and they're not there all the time, so they're not supporting all the business in the same way they would be if they're downtown. But we may still benefit from having that option there, and I wouldn't want to include that or make it a use that's not allowed in that area. So I would assume that we'd want to, again, for our future discussions, but I would want to include that as an allowed use in the district as well.
Great. That's all I got.
So right now we have, this hotel is a special permit use. Which is this district?
But then,
Which is?
B1 is, B1, yeah.
Who's that?
I was just noting, I have an excerpt of the news table here, and I was noticing that the hotel was a special permit use in B2 and B3, but I didn't record B1. So.
This is from the business park work you're doing, yeah.
So, it's not out of the question in a way.
And there has, I don't know, I'll say like, there has been some interest in that area, in a hotel, from the private sector, not just us, talking about a hotel that we want to have in the city, but, so we might see something come forward then, but.
Okay. Great. And then, of course, there's that, where CJ's, bus line was, is that public or is that private?
Yeah, so that's actually under Mass DOT. We have reached out, I have spoken to some folks of the state, the mayor has reached out to some of our reps of the state. And I don't know how long it'll take to mobilize something like that, but without necessarily getting rid of the transit component, maybe maintaining, or there's been talk about maybe CJ, might be interested in coming back. But to maintain, I think that transit component, I would not want to remove that piece of it, because I think that's important, the regional, sort of been down to Boston, I don't want to maintain that. But I think we could also potentially have a mix of things happening in there. It could be that you put a parking deck, for instance, against the concrete wall, and then you have some buildings that are sort of fronting, and you arrive on the ramps off into Newburyport, and you say, oh, this is something that might look like something that, you're arriving somewhere. And then, it's only so much you can do in any given parcel, but I think it might be possible to do more than just a surface parking lot, while also keeping that transit component in a way, with the combination of the whole district. So what we're doing is we're considering that to be like a sub area that if the state decides one or the other to work with us to mobilize that in a way that isn't just strictly highway, transit, that we could consider the housing piece or the mixed use piece as part of that as well.
Which is essentially what happened with the train station, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Disposed
that's right. They
of
disposed of
transportation
surplus.
land and
Right.
allowed residential to go in.
Right.
So I should just check in B1 also, it's a special permit, hotels a special permit, so.
Yeah, it's just that the current district doesn't cover the whole area that so.
So, okay, so I think for the next meeting, we should be, as I say, you can share photos or examples of anything you want, and I'll put them into a shared folder.
Do we think about like maybe sharing visualizing some of those on the 15th, or are we?
Well, I'm just saying, just to collect something, just to start collecting.
Yeah.
So I can, it doesn't have to be by the next meeting, but
Okay.
I'm just thinking that.
Start
just
accumulating.
Start thinking,
Yeah.
accumulating stuff, and I'll set up a folder
Okay.
and also start considering, we'll put in the staff memo, a reminder about thinking about dates for the January, a separate meeting in January.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I don't have any preferences how it's done, I'm wondering like, if it's like I'm just thinking conceptually, if it's like a Dropbox, do we create a subfolder where each person can just automatically go in there anytime they have something, just dump it in there?
Yeah,
Versus like having email, like.
No, I see, yeah,
And that way,
I can do that, yeah.
people can self-populate their own subfolder in the Dropbox, for instance.
Or we can just have a
Whatever
folder
works.
that just says
I don't care.
all
whatever.
photos and examples.
Yeah, whatever works, maybe it's one folder, other works, but yeah, okay.
Anything else on that? Anything else we want to say about that?
Oh, sorry. No.
And you want to say one more thing, don't you? About something
Um,
else, about next week, the next meeting?
Yeah, so we have a zoning hearing we're now gonna have on the 15th. This has been a little bit more, a little faster track, for various different reasons, but, long story short, the global site up on High Street, the old gas station site where there's been interest in getting rid of the so-called blight. It's been sitting there for a while and say, look, let's actually change that to residential. So, Global was compelled to go back to Exxon, got their, a release of the restriction on residential, allowing it to happen. No basements, obviously with the soil conditions, liability, they just leave it there, there was nothing detected, they just, for liability purposes, everybody down the chain wants to, keep it that way. So no basements, but, basically putting what I think is a reasonable concept at this point, give or take a few details, which is basically 4 units, 2 separate structures, one being a primary, as you might expect on High Street, that whole quarter, a primary structure and essentially a second structure that's like a carriage house. So Scott Brown happens to be the architect working them. It's a pretty good plan, I think they're working with now. There'll be a sort of a combination presentation of me speaking to the zoning change piece of it in part, and them speaking a little bit to the site plan, piece of what they're looking at for the project. And the idea here, in essence, and I'm sorry, I'm just glossing over the surface here a little bit, but there's a lot of mechanics and so forth. But the assumption here is that we're essentially putting a development agreement in place first. So it's effectively the mayor will be signing a development agreement with them to make sure that if the zoning change happens, they would be committed contractually essentially to submit something that fits in the envelope of this development agreement before they go to the board for approval. So here, where we see what I think is a reasonably developed plan for addressing the butter concerns, reducing, having only one driveway curb cut on State Street, having nothing on High Street, pulling that driveway curb cut away from the intersection, a lot of these things sort of working their way in there, that effectively that will provide a level of confidence for a zoning change that might otherwise be debated. It's actually a zoning change that would make the zoning of that parcel consistent with the other 3 corners. So there's nothing unusual about that zoning change per se. It actually makes sense, but it's just unusual because that High Street corridor, High Street residential district that was created in recent years included or grabbed that parcel as well. And there isn't really a viable way of making that happen, with the requirements of that district. So the idea here is to say, look, it's not unreasonable to have this particular plan, the R3 zoning district, with the other 3 corners, makes sense here, and we do the same. Treat the intersection essentially as you're framing it at the same. And this would facilitate that project while also maintaining, sort of a control on what's happening there. And I think would result in a much, much better outcome for that intersection, which is that as you're driving about State Street out of the downtown, you'd see a building or, a building with a carriage house type structure that feels like it, I'm not saying it's always there, but it feels like it belongs there and it doesn't, strike you as like this gas station is out of place, it feels like it's just part of that organic experience of coming up, out of the downtown through High Street, and whether you're heading straight or down High Street or it feels like it belongs there and it's just part of the experience on High Street in general. But I think it's a good place, and this is, unless there's some, major concern folks have, my hope is that all things being equal, is I think because it's a reasonably good project that we're able to, quote unquote, expedite the approval of the zoning change to facilitate the permitting that then has to happen such that the physical changes we wanted to see can actually happen in the next construction cycle. Next, spring, we could start to see some changes happening. The gas station comes down, residences are built, the landscaping and all that happens, new sidewalks and all that kind of stuff. So I'll leave it to you to decide, how you feel about the whole spectrum. But to me, it seems to be going in a good direction, and that's why I feel like it was ready then for prime time to bring to, for consideration of the zoning change and the development agreement. So
Are you voting that? You're expecting to vote that night?
that's up to you.
So we hope to.
You might wanna, okay, I think I might have to recuse myself on that one. I think Rob is representing the buyer.
I don't know. I'd have to. I know
Who's,
for the attorney for the permitting is Lisa Meady.
Yeah.
I don't know who's representing the other.
okay, if it's not my partner, that's
Yeah.
fine.
It won't be an issue because we don't need to have a super majority.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, all right. And can we comment?
Yeah, okay, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. I'll be impartial.
There's been a lot of talk about this property, but I actually don't have like any sort of outstanding questions based on what the plan is that they're working with, and so, we might have a little bit miscellaneous concern here, there are questions over it, but to me, it's all kind of shaping up pretty well. And I don't have concerns myself, so unless folks, I would be perfectly fine with the recommendation saying, adopt the zoning change. And then recognizing we expect by the 15th to have that development agreement to point to that says, here's some constraints on the building and the architecture and the height and the sizing, and so forth. And here's some constraints on the site that kind of point to a specific plan. The abutters can know what to expect. We can all know what to expect. And to me, it's all good.
And I think it would be- even though we will not be the permitting entity for this, I would like to have some visuals about the plan itself as part of that presentation.
Yes, and I know that the overall site plan will be presented as part of that. We had talked about the architecturals. I know that they are working on some of that. I don't know what they plan on including in the presentation for that. But I know that the development agreement itself, what the attorney has suggested there, and I'm actually okay with myself based on where it ended up, but rather than having sort of detailed elevations that are pulled in the development agreement prior to the permit before the board, they tried to via text, put some basic parameters on that, in terms of height that's allowed, style of the building, and so forth. And I think that that's reasonably well enough defined, that I'm comfortable enough that that leaves, defines the box enough that we don't have to leave it, entirely to just the ZBA. So I'm okay with that myself, but you'll have to decide yourselves whether or not you feel that the site plan plus that text is sufficient versus wanting elevations in the development.
Well, I think as much as you could give us.
Yeah.
Would be helpful.
Yeah.
So the ZBA would be the permit granting authority? ultimately?
Correct. I think here what we would have for the presentation is, a couple maps showing the zoning change, the context of the neighborhood. We're talking a little about the history of the past, but then,
As a special permit.
sorry, as a special permit, yes, for multifamily, yeah. And the site plan showing exactly, how things will be laid out there, give or take a few inches, is gonna be that. And then on the architectural, we'll probably see we'll review the text of the development agreement, and then you'll have some discussion if you want about, from there about whether or not you feel more specificity needed from there. But in my view, it's sufficient to kind of put a box, an acceptable box, so to speak, around it before it comes in, before the zoning change gets adopted by the council, facilitate the permit process, and before the board itself gets the plans for the project. We've already defined enough of an envelope for that it can't be problematic, is the idea. So I'm good with that myself, and I think we would see if they have elevations, they've been, provided by that, we'll be able to throw them up there. Otherwise, we'll probably speak in more generalities, and Scott, I imagine that Scott might be able to bring some visual examples, even if it isn't the final elevations, because I'm sure they're might be still tweaking that a little bit, because obviously they're not doing the full blown work on that until they get the permitting and the zoning in place. But he's already working and developing that, and I think he may be able to show some visuals that develop that a little further from what we were.
And you said something about Global had to get an agreement with, was it Exxon or?
Yeah, Exxon had put just like typical gas station, put a restriction, no residential ever, and so it's kind of a contradiction because where our zoning only allows the residential, doesn't allow the commercial uses, and it's a demanded use anyway, so we don't really want a traffic generating use in that corner, really, I would say. I think it's a good thing for us not to have a traffic generating use at that intersection there, so in order to facilitate a viable residential development, a couple of things had to happen. One, the zoning change, the high street zoning isn't really enough to allow a viable project there. Something that works, and we can talk about that, but it's just goes back to dimensional requirements and things like that. The other piece of it is the fact that the deed restriction from Exxon itself was prohibiting the residential, and they were able to undo that by saying, look, we did some testing to verify there aren't any, shouldn't be any major concerns here, and we'll put a deed restriction saying there's no basement, so that to avoid even the possibility of there being some future issue, nobody's, other than excavating for utilities, you're not putting any habitable space below grade. So
Just out of curiosity, are they less willing to release the deed restriction because they're concerned about future liability?
Yeah.
If somebody were to build
Yeah.
on it and there's hazardous potential?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Actually.
it's the attorneys with their hats saying,
You would
like, let's
think I would
avoid
know that.
liability. Yeah, yeah, it's all about liability.
I don't do environment.
So, the other point, I'm not sure we've talked about yet, is
Yeah.
the fact that it's only 4 units means that it's not a site plan review. So it's
Yes,
another reason
sorry, Rick and I
why-
were talking about this earlier, yeah. So it's not a site plan review that's being sent to the planning board. We talked about some of the dynamics. I'm personally fine with it, generically speaking, where it is, in part because the development agreement and the plan is essentially locked in before, in scope before it gets to the board anyway. And also because it's a discretionary special permit, multifamily isn't allowed as of right, it's by special permit. So you still have that discretionary review by the board, so if there's something that's problematic, they say, look, you gotta continue this until you address our concerns, and, they don't get the approval until then. I'm not sure what those issues would be, but we, explore those at that point, but I feel like it's reasonably contained enough that with that discretionary review and, so forth, it's, shouldn't be, I don't know, a problem in any way.
What number of units would trigger?
Five.
It's 5, okay.
So, and I noticed this in the demolition control order district, what does that do? Who gets involved in that? Is that the zoning board?
They would be the special permit granting authority, so we're having now, this is not a historical, like the garage, the
Yeah.
gas station is not a historical structure that people are gonna be, I
Right,
imagine.
right, right. They still have to approve-
What's that?
they still have to approve the demolition.
I don't think that here we have that trigger because of the structure itself.
So it has to be.
Yeah, and this structure, I don't see triggering that threshold. So, in that case, we would essentially. What's that?
So you might be surprised.
Yeah, and again, even if that were the case, I mean, I would imagine that would be more of a formality. We can check in the dates, but that would be just a formality, I would imagine, because I can't imagine who's gonna argue to defend that structure being preserved.
I was just interested in the
Yeah.
overlap of permitting authorities.
Yeah.
So that falls within that region, the historic overlay.
It's not the historic, it's across the street from the downtown overlay district, but it's in the demolition control overlay
I
district,
see.
which is. If it were across the street, we'd be looking at it,
Oh,
but
okay.
because it's on this side, on the south side of
Yeah,
the street, the ZBA looks at it.
interesting, all right,
Right.
okay.
True quasi-historic districts were created via zoning in order to address some areas that we weren't addressing we weren't having a local historic districts, we had to have some stopgaps. The downtown one is a little bit more important just because, in some ways, but the downtown district was getting the planning board rightfully so because it has a bunch of permitting overlapping there already. It doesn't, it makes sense that the board is already doing a bunch of permitting there to have the same thing, and not bounce somebody back between two different boards. ZBA typically has residential, so they get the one that the DCOT is a huge residential area, it makes sense for them to have that one. And so these historical components and character, particularly the downtown, the character sort of aspect of it, both of them provide some levels of protection for these, key areas of the city that weren't there before, and provides, well, there were a bunch of special permits and variances, things like that, that are happening. It's an additional level of control to make sure we don't get something atrocious, right? So, yeah.
Anything else on that, or is anything?
No, thank you.
Any other announcements? I skipped over approval of minutes. Oh, is that-
Kim mentioned, I don't know if you had something you were gonna speak to tonight, that she mentioned before the mail, I don't know, was that,
We
I
had,
was getting it through her, so I don't know whether.
we had a meeting today about the pump house, we had formal discussion.
Yeah, and I pulled up the visual only because of her mention of it, and I thought.
They're pulling together another bid package, I think, in a week or so. And I think, we've all seen fundamentally these elevations. A couple of things that came out of the discussion today. One is to change the roof from slate to a flat seam copper roof. Just because of the complexity of a slate roof on creating a hip roof, a slate hip roof on a building that's roughly, 14 feet square. There's a lot of complexity to that roof that I don't think in the end is gonna look terrific. So Chuck Griffin proposed as a suitable, historic substitute, a flat seam copper roof, which I'm fine with. I don't have an issue with that at all. But because our agreement with them stipulated brick, real materials, slate roof, we're required to go through, a process just to approve that. So that was one thing that we talked about today. We talked about acoustics. They've got a response relative to the louvers and adding an acoustical plenum on the backside of the louvers. So we don't have direct transmission of sound from the inside to the outside of the louvers. We talked about adding gasketing at the door so that the door is also a soundproof, construction. They are trying to push the building back between 10 and 20 feet from where it was proposed when we saw it last, which pushes it back behind the kind of the first layer of trees. So it's a little bit more obscured than what they suggested previously. It's tucked slightly into the hillside, not very much, but probably only a foot to 2 feet of grade change that they will have to deal with, but it's pushed back, which will make the view from the street over the top of that down to the pond better. So I think that's a positive, but it's probably all we're gonna get in terms of relocating the building. The last thing we talked about was simplifying the door detail, which has this X detail with a circle in the middle, and we agreed that perhaps the doors could be a more traditional, there'll be steel doors, but they could appear to be a more traditional style of rail panel door. And that they might spend some money putting more of a decorative screen in front of the louvers so that they don't look like a contemporary add-on to the overall structure. So it's just, a lot of detail discussion.
So when does do we need to have a consultation with members of the planning board? Not the full board, with members of the planning board, in order to approve these changes? When do they need to have that approved?
She wanted to have a preliminary package together, I think in about a week.
Okay,
So it needs to happen.
so there are three areas where they're approved by the planning director with consultation with members of the planning board designated by the chair at such time. And they're the exterior design, the materials of the exterior, and the location. So all of these are going to be changed. So I guess I would.
Yeah, my assumption is that if everything's sort of tracking that direction, that with that updated revised, material that to be approved, so to speak, or, that whoever, who's not, that we have that quick closure outside this.
Yes,
Right.
that's what I said. So,
We can confirm that, consistent with what Bob just, explained, and then that could be formally approved by me as a modification,
Yes.
original approval. But for Rick, and Bob, we've consulted with the board as a body, so obviously if you have any concerns here, let us know, but.
but I would designate Bob and Jamie, if you're willing to do this, to meet with, to look at the revised plans and share part of that one.
If we need to, dispatch somebody to the Zoom, we can do that. I mean, it's easier, it's easier in person, but if we.
Right, but I think because it's gonna be, you're just gonna be able to look at the plans.
Yeah, it should be just confirming, unless you have some concerns with what I just outlined, hopefully it's just confirming that detail is sufficient.
I think the only open issue we had after the discussion today was the actual brick that they wanted to propose. I mean, everything we talked about was quieting the building down a little bit. So it could get a little cartoonish if there's a lot of contrast in materials, and it just might not fit very well. So they were very much in agreement that quieting all of the colors and materials down a little bit was a direction that they would support.
Is that the white band, that's partly, you had talked about that becoming a brick band that's,
I had suggested that the band that's at the top of the door,
yeah,
that maybe that was just a projecting course of brick.
yeah.
Chuck wants to keep that as stone.
Okay.
So,
Okay, I don't have a strong, feeling about that.
Yeah, we talked about the dent molding at the top, just underneath the eave of the roof, and I think I convinced them to make that brick rather than a white painted thing. They had an aluminum soffit that was a sort of not so great residential detail. So we talked about alternatives that look more like painted wood and has, discrete venting in it.
I like all the directions that you're.
Yeah,
you're going.
So it's just sort of taking it down a little bit.
Is it still delegated design or is Chuck
No.
designing it?
They're designing it.
Okay,
They're
good. That's
just
better than,
full contract documents that they're not going down and delegated design.
Oh, that's great. well, that solves a lot of my
That's
concerns.
a huge
Yeah.
change.
One thing I would give the three of you a heads up about is that when I last talked, because I only had a brief exchange about this, and I know you guys just recently had this conversation, but my understanding, I don't know whether she's submitting an updated drawing versus a letter with sort of an explanation of each of these things very clearly spelled out. So obviously, my preference is always to have like a plan, call outs, whatnot, but it was in her court, the project manager to come back with a submission that we put to our online portal for a minor modification, which the zoning administrator, Jennifer, then routes to me, right, for the sign off, which I can't do without doing the consultation, right? So in essence, we'll have to discuss that piece of it as we're looking at what we have to document the modification. So if you have concerns,
I mean, they've got, 90% contract document.
Yeah.
There you go.
75%.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
But
Yeah.
that would accommodate these changes and we could look at a fairly complete.
Yeah, I would imagine a plan that's even more detailed than this, would be on a single drawing sheet, very clearly spelled out with a couple of callouts and very simple to know, there's no dispute about. I prefer that over just a textbook list saying, all right, this is gonna be substituted for that. And that's just, it was hard for people to, you know.
Or tiny conceptual drawings like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going the right direction to me.
You know, I think,
Yeah.
for the decision to make it a freestanding building, which, as you know, there were different opinions about. If it is a freestanding building, I think we're headed in a reasonable.
I agree, if there's too many choices, then you're bound to have different opinions.
Yeah.
Versus shrink it down, to your point, I mean, good job.
It was disappointing for me to see all of the heavy equipment at the corner of the mall related to the playground. That they got would have been
Thinking-
so easy to make them all.
Yeah.
There, and with all of that equipment there.
Okay, good.
Think of the children.
So,
I don't think they have to-
so you got to coordinate that with these guys.
Yeah, so I think we're pending Kim's providing that material to us. We'll reach out to just have a quick, hopefully meeting in person, if we can do, Zoom or we'll do that. But just to review that and make sure that everything does actually capture what Bob just said, has that sufficiently, you're all good with it, I can just do my sign off.
Good.
Has Kim given you a summary of the meeting? Should I put together?
Your meeting you had? No, I only got a quick verbal exchange with her. She summarized briefly some of the stuff, you talked about. And I understood that you might be mentioning it tonight so that we could then expedite the expectation that this follow-up.
Yeah, I said I would mention it tonight.
Yeah.
And we would figure out a path
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, she's expecting to submit that online, at which point we can confirm that the documentation, like I said, has, sufficient, information drawing to document that change.
Do you want me to send you and Rick an email, just kind of summarizing the points that we?
That would be great, mainly because we could make sure there's nothing missing when we, just, I don't wanna waste time with having to redo or them redo
Yeah, I
again.
can, I can
Yeah.
do that.
That'd be, that'd be great.
Okay,
Okay,
anything else?
now, thank you.
So I can circle back and look at the minutes.
I like that you did that, so you wouldn't forget.
Yeah. Well, I've
Literally circle.
already forgotten, so I went back. and So we have minutes of October 4th to approve. You were not present, so we
Nope.
will not be voting on that. I sent some edits and a question about one section, but then you're gonna take care of that question, just clarification. David, were you looking at minutes while you were in Japan?
Not while I was there, I did a quick look. So, yeah, I'm okay with what I saw. I did a quick look.
Okay, nobody has anything else? I will ask for a motion to approve the minutes of October 4th.
So moved, Alden?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? No discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. Does anybody else have anything else to say? Okay, yeah, in that case, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Most to adjourn.
Okay,
Second.
okay, all in favor?
And
Okay, thank you, everybody.
thank you. Thanks, guys.
I know I missed like 3 meetings in a row. Are there any